The galaxy was tired. It was a fatigue that seemed to permeate the very metal of the starships and the recycled air of the orbital stations. The Ethelgard Empire, once the blindingly bright architects of interstellar order, was slowly suffocating under the weight of its own bureaucracy and ancient rotting traditions. Humanity was the new variable in this decaying equation. Humans were scrappy, loud, and ambitious, spreading out from Earth with ships that rattled and shook. Building colonies on rocks the Ethelgard had deemed unworthy of terraforming. Peace existed, but it was a fragile thing, held together not by trust but by a complex web of shared encrypted networks and trade agreements that everyone was too afraid to break. Elias Thorne did not care much for galactic politics. He cared about the credit balance on his datapad and whether the coffee synthesizer on Station 4 Sigma was dispensing liquid or sludge today. He sat in a cramped booth at the back of a noodle stall in the lower ring of the station. The air here smelled of ozone, frying oil, and unwashed flight suits. Elias was 34 years old, though the gray threading through his dark hair and the permanent crease between his brows made him look older. He tapped at a portable console with fingers that were callous and quick. The screen was a chaotic waterfall of hexadecimal strings and logic gates. "Done," Elias said to the empty air. He slid a small data chip across the scarred table to a man who looked like he had been constructed entirely out of spare engine parts and bad decisions. The smuggler, a heavy-set man named Jace, picked up the chip with a greasy hand. "This will get past the blockade sensors?" Jace asked. "It will make your cargo scan as a shipment of agricultural fertilizer," Elias replied, his voice rough from disuse. "Do not deviate from the flight path I encoded. If you drift 3 degrees to port, you are on your own." Jace grunted and transferred the credits. It was not a fortune. It was barely enough to pay Elias's docking fees and buy a meal that did not taste like recycled protein paste. But it was work. Elias pocketed the credit chit and stood up. He was tall, lanky, and wore a jacket that had seen better decades. As he walked through the crowded corridors of Station 4 Sigma, he kept his head down. He preferred to be a ghost. There was a time when his name had been spoken in the gilded halls of the Earth Admiralty, back when he was the prodigy, the breaker of uncrackable codes, the man who saw patterns where others saw static. That ended the day he realized the code he was breaking was hiding a kill order for a civilian transport. He had leaked the data. He had saved 2,000 lives. And in return, the Admiralty had stripped him of his rank, blackened his file, and ensured that no legitimate government contractor would ever hire him again. He was a hero to the families of the survivors and a traitor to the men with the medals. Elias had learned the hard way that noble causes usually ended with a knife in the back. The station's ambient hum suddenly changed. The usual thrum of ventilation fans and distant docking clamps was swallowed by a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to come from the hull itself. Elias stopped. Around him, the flow of foot traffic halted. Dock workers, traders, and drifters turned their heads toward the large viewports that lined the promenade. Outside, the darkness of space was being sliced open by silver. 3 Ethelgard ships were approaching the station. They did not look like human vessels. Human ships were blocky, utilitarian things, covered in antennae and exhaust ports. The alien ships were smooth, elongated teardrops of liquid metal that reflected the starlight. They moved with a silence that was unnerving, gliding into the docking bays like sharks entering a lagoon. It was a royal delegation. Elias watched as the massive airlock doors of the main docking bay cycled open. Security drones, sleek spherical machines hovering on anti-gravity repulsors, buzzed into the promenade, pushing the crowd back to create a wide lane. Banners of shimmering, holographic silk unfurled from the ceiling, displaying the crest of the High Dynasties. A protocol officer, a human man sweating profusely in a dress uniform that was too tight, ran past Elias, shouting orders into a comms link. "Make way! Clear the sector! The delegation is disembarking." Elias leaned against a bulkhead, arms crossed. He should have left. He should have gone back to his tiny rented quarters and slept off the headache that was building behind his eyes. But curiosity, his oldest and most dangerous vice, kept him rooted to the spot. The airlock hissed, a ramp extended, glowing with a soft internal light. The Ethel Guard emerged. They were tall, slender humanoids with skin that possessed a subtle, pearlescent sheen, shifting colors slightly as they moved. They wore robes of woven glass and metal that chimed softly. At the center of the formation walked Princess Lyriath. She was striking, even by the exotic standards of her species. She was young, perhaps equivalent to a human in her mid-20s, with eyes that were large and completely luminous, glowing with a pale violet light. Bioluminescent markings, intricate geometric patterns that looked like constellations, traced the line of her throat and disappeared beneath the high collar of her silver tunic. She moved with a terrifying amount of poise, her chin held high. But Elias, who had made a career out of reading the tiniest variances in data streams, saw something else. He saw the way her fingers twitched against the fabric of her robe. He saw the sharpness in her gaze as she scanned the crowd. She looked bored. More than bored. She looked impatient, like a predator forced to sit through a tea party. Her entourage stopped near the customs checkpoint. The human protocol officer bowed so low he nearly tipped over. "Your Highness," he stammered. "Welcome to Station 4 Sigma. We are honored by your presence. We have prepared the executive suite for your comfort." Lyriath did not answer immediately. She looked around the station, her gaze lingering on a rusted exposed pipe that was dripping condensation onto the deck. Beside her, a tall Ethel Guard male, likely a senior advisor, wrinkled his nose. He spoke in Galactic Standard, his voice smooth and dripping with disdain. "The infrastructure is charmingly primitive," the advisor said. "It is a wonder the oxygen scrubbers function at all. One feels as though one is walking inside a combustion engine." The human officer turned red. Elias, standing 10 feet away in the press of the crowd, rolled his eyes. He muttered to himself, loud enough only for the air around him, "If our scrubbers were any better, they would filter out all the hot air you are blowing." It was a throwaway comment, a bit of dry sarcasm to amuse himself. But Lyriath stopped. Her head snapped toward him. Those luminous violet eyes locked onto Elias's face with the precision of a targeting laser. The crowd between them seemed to vanish. She did not look offended. The corner of her mouth quirked upward, the tiniest fraction of an inch. It was a look of secret amusement, a spark of connection in a room full of dull formalities. Then, just as quickly, she looked away. She gestured to the advisor. "We proceed," Lyriath said. Her voice was melodic but carried the weight of command. The procession moved on. Elias let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding. He felt a strange electric tingle on the back of his neck. That was close, he thought. He pushed off the bulkhead, intending to find a bar that served cheap whiskey. He took 3 steps before 2 security drones dropped out of the air in front of him, blocking his path with humming energy fields. "Citizen Elias Thorne," the drone's synthesized voice announced. "You are required to accompany us." Elias froze. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The past had finally caught up. Someone had dug up the old files. The Admiralty had decided that blacklisting him was not enough punishment. On what charges? Elias asked, keeping his voice steady. No charges, the drone replied. You have been summoned by the delegation. Elias stared at the machine. The delegation? Lead the way, he said. They marched him through the station, up the service lifts, and into the high-security sector usually reserved for visiting admirals and corporate CEOs. The corridors here were clean, white, and sterile. They stopped in front of Conference Room Alpha. The doors slid open. Inside, the room had been transformed. The standard-issue conference table was there, but the lighting had been dimmed to a twilight hue that the Ethel Guard preferred. The air was cool and smelled faintly of ozone and crushed flowers. Princess Lyriath stood at the far end of the room. The advisor who had insulted the station was there, along with 4 armored guards holding energy pikes. Leave us, Lyriath said as Elias entered. The advisor blinked. Highness, security protocols dictate that I remain. Leave us, she repeated. Her voice did not rise in volume, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The advisor bowed stiffly and swept out of the room, taking 2 of the guards with him. The remaining 2 guards stepped back into the shadows, becoming statues. A small floating spherical droid, her personal AI assistant, hovered over her shoulder. Elias stood alone in the center of the room. He felt underdressed in his worn jacket and boots. You are Elias Thorne, Lyriath said. She was studying him again, tilting her head slightly to the side. The bioluminescent patterns on her neck pulsed with a slow, rhythmic light. I am, Elias said. If this is about the comment in the hallway, I apologize. I have a problem with my internal filter. Lyriath walked around the table. She moved with a fluid grace that made human movement look jerky and uncoordinated. The comment was accurate, she said. This station is a rust bucket, but I am not interested in your opinions on architecture. I am interested in your record. She waved a hand, and a hologram sprang to life above the table. It was his file, not the public one, but the classified one. It showed his service record, his awards, and the redacted black marks that had ended his career. You were the youngest lead cryptographer in the Earth Fleet, Lyriath recited. You cracked the grand cipher of the Krell insurgency in 4 hours. You wrote the polymorphic encryption that currently protects the Bank of Terra. And then you were discharged for insubordination. I prefer the term moral objection, Elias said. Lyriath paused. She looked at him, really looked at him, and Elias felt that strange jolt again. She was not looking at a criminal. She was looking at a tool, a weapon, or perhaps a solution. My own cryptographers are competent, Lyriath said, her tone shifting to something more serious. They are trained in the finest academies of Ethelgard. They follow the rules of logic and mathematics perfectly, and that is why they have failed. Failed at what? Elias asked. Lyriath reached into the folds of her robe and pulled out an object. She placed it on the table. It was a shard of crystal, roughly the size of a human fist. But it was unlike any crystal Elias had ever seen. It was dark, smoky, and it seemed to vibrate. Inside the crystal, light was trapped, moving in frantic, jagged patterns. Elias stepped closer, drawn in despite himself. The hologram above the table changed. It projected the data coming from the crystal. Elias's eyes widened. The air above the table filled with a storm of symbols. Fractals spiraled into infinity. Geometric shapes collapsed and reformed, and streams of data flowed like liquid mercury. It was chaos, but it was beautiful chaos. We found this embedded in one of the oldest relay cores in the Outer Rim, Lyriath said quietly. It is not just data. It is a ghost code. A ghost code? Elias repeated. It was dormant for centuries. she explained. But now it is waking up. It is rewriting the network protocols around it. It is spreading. Elias, like a virus, but intelligent. It adapts. Every time my team tries to isolate it, the code changes its own syntax. It mocks them. She looked at the spinning chaos. This code holds the key to an ancient failsafe buried in the Empire's communication grid, Lyriath said. And I believe it contains evidence of a conspiracy that threatens both my people and yours. If this code fully activates, it could trigger a war that will leave your colonies in ashes and my empire in ruins. Elias looked at the projection. He could see the recursive loop she was talking about. It was aggressive coding. It felt angry. Why come to me? Elias asked. You have the resources of a galaxy-spanning empire because my people think in straight lines. Lyriath said, we value order, tradition. This code is wild. It breaks the rules. I need a mind that knows how to break rules. I need the man who cracked the Krell cipher because he realized the key was based on a musical scale, not a mathematical algorithm. She stepped closer to him. She was close enough now that he could smell her scent, something like rain on hot stone and static electricity. She was taller than him by 2 inches. I am offering you a job, Elias Thorne. I have a job, Elias said defensively. Fixing shipping manifests for smugglers? Lyriath raised an eyebrow. I am offering you full political protection. I will wipe your record clean. I will grant you enough wealth to buy this station and turn it into a personal museum of primitive art if you wish. Elias looked at the crystal, then back at her. The challenge was there in her eyes. It was not just a job offer. She was testing him. She wanted to see if the legend matched the man. And what if I fail? Elias asked. Then we all likely die, Lyriath said with a shrug. But at least the pay will be good until then. Elias let out a short, dry laugh. You have a strange way of motivating people. Princess? Lyriath smiled then. It was a sharp, dangerous smile that showed too many teeth, but it made her face breathtakingly alive. Her eyes flared with that violet luminescence. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that echoed in the silent room. If you can decipher this, I will give my ship for you. Elias stared at her. For a second, he thought she was joking. The solar hymn? Her flagship? It was a vessel worth more than the GDP of the entire human frontier. You are serious, Elias said. Deadly, Lyriath replied. Elias looked at the code again. The challenge hooked into his brain like a fishhook. He could see the edges of the pattern. He could feel the rhythm of it. It was impossible. It was a suicide mission. And he wanted to do it more than he had wanted anything in 5 years. He looked at Lyriath. He felt a pull toward her that had nothing to do with gravity. She was a puzzle he wanted to solve just as much as the code. You are offering me a ship that thinks, Elias said. A ship that is bonded to your royal bloodline. You are insane. Perhaps, Lyriath said. Or perhaps I just know the value of a good codebreaker. Elias sighed. He ran a hand through his hair. Fine, he said. I'll take the job. But not for the money, and not for the ship, because I do not know how to fly a cathedral. I will do it because I want to see what is hiding inside that rock. Lyriath's smile softened into something genuine. Good, she said. Then we leave immediately. Wait. Now? Elias asked. I need to pack. I have a cactus I need to water. My assistant will have your belongings collected, Lyriath said, turning toward the door. The cactus will be brought aboard. Half an hour later, Elias found himself standing in the docking bay, looking up at the solar hymn. If the other Ethelgard ships were silver sharks, The solar hymn was a god. It was massive, a spire of white and gold metal that seemed to hum with a low, resonant song. The hull was not smooth. It was etched with millions of microscopic runes that glowed faintly. It looked less like a machine and more like a living creature grown from the heart of a star. "This is a semi-sentient vessel," Liriath explained as they walked up the ramp. "It is bound to my biometric signature. It responds to my thoughts." "Does it like guests?" Elias asked, eyeing the pulsing walls of the airlock. "It is curious," Liriath said. "Just do not touch the neural conduits. It tickles." They stepped inside. The interior of the ship was breathtaking. There were no hard angles, only sweeping curves and archways of light. The floor felt warm beneath his boots. The air was rich and energized. Liriath led him directly to the central data cathedral. It was a circular room with a ceiling that vaulted up into darkness. In the center of the room, a massive holographic projector was waiting. Liriath placed the crystal into a receptor slot. Instantly, the room exploded with light. The ghost code expanded, filling the space around them. It was a hurricane of symbols, a galaxy of encrypted malice. It swirled around Elias and Liriath, casting dancing shadows on their faces. Elias stepped forward, his face bathed in the blue and violet light of the projection. He reached out a hand, his fingers brushing through a stream of floating digits. "It is beautiful," Elias whispered. "And terrifying," Liriath added, stepping up beside him. Her shoulder brushed against his arm. Elias looked at the storm of data. He felt the old thrill returning, the electric buzz of a problem that refused to be solved. He glanced at Liriath. She was watching the code, her face set in a mask of determination, but her eyes were wide with a hidden fear. He realized then that she was just as trapped as he was, trapped by duty, by politics, by a galaxy that was crumbling around her. He took a deep breath. "All right," Elias said, rolling up his sleeves. "Let's see what you are hiding." He stepped into the data storm, and the story began. The data cathedral of the solar hymn was not designed for the human mind. It was a space that defied gravity and perspective, a towering silo of obsidian metal where the walls themselves seemed to breathe. Elias stood on a suspended platform in the center of this void, surrounded by a suffocating blizzard of light. The ghost code was not merely displayed on screens, it was projected into the air in three-dimensional columns that stretched up 100 feet, cascading downward like waterfalls of neon rain. Elias had been awake for 20 hours. His eyes felt like they were packed with sand, and the sheer scale of the information was beginning to fracture his sense of reality. He paced the small perimeter of the platform, muttering to himself, waving his hands through the intangible glyphs that scattered like frightened schools of fish before reforming instantly behind him. "You are not just a cipher," Elias growled at a particularly dense cluster of purple fractals. "You are a brat, a stubborn, screaming brat that refuses to go to bed." He stopped and glared at the data. It pulsed back at him, a rhythmic expansion and contraction that mimicked a heartbeat. Elias ran a hand through his hair, which was now standing up in several directions. "If I shift the prime integers to the left, you collapse," he said to the air. "But if I anchor them with a recursive loop, you expand. You are eating your own tail." "Why are you eating your own tail?" High above him, on a curved balcony that overlooked the data pit, Princess Liriath watched. She leaned against the railing, her chin resting on her hand. To her, the code was a terrifying weapon, a relic of a darker age that threatened to undo her family's legacy. But watching Elias Thorne try to wrestle it into submission was the most entertaining thing she had seen in years. Her Ethelgard scholars treated data with religious reverence. They sat in silence, meditating on algorithms, touching the interface nodes with gloved hands. Elias treated the code like a broken engine he was trying to fix with a wrench and a string of insults. "He is talking to the mathematics," Liriath observed quietly. Her personal guard, a towering warrior named Varric, whose armor was fused directly to his carapace, shifted uneasily. "The human is unstable, Highness." Varric rumbled. "He moves without rhythm. He vibrates with unnecessary energy. He is thinking." "Varric," Liriath corrected. "He thinks with his body. It is fascinating. Down below." Elias stopped pacing. He stared at a sequence of symbols that kept shifting every time he looked at them directly. He squeezed his eyes shut and started tapping a rhythm on his thigh. "Eeny, meeny, miny, mo," Elias chanted, his voice echoing strangely in the vast chamber. "Catch a tiger by the toe." Liriath frowned. She tapped a control on the railing, projecting her voice down to the platform. "Elias," she said. Elias jumped, spinning around. He looked up, squinting against the glare of the data streams until he spotted her silhouette on the balcony. "Princess," Elias called out, "I did not know you were in the cheap seats." "What is that chant?" Liriath asked, her voice echoing with perfect clarity. "Is it an invocation? A human algorithm for random number generation?" Elias blinked. "No. It is, well, it is a nursery rhyme. For children, it helps me find the rhythm. Sometimes you have to stop thinking about the math and just feel where the beat drops." Liriath stared at him. Then she looked at Varric. "Record that," she commanded. "Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, Highness, surely—" Varric began. "Record it," Liriath repeated, her face deadly serious. "If it is a mnemonic device powerful enough to dismantle a ghost code, we must understand its syntax. What is a tiger? It is a large predator with stripes." Elias yelled up, "Look, the point is not the tiger, none, the point is the choice. This code is making choices, none, it is adaptive." He turned back to the swirling lights, his demeanor shifting instantly from playful to intense. "It is alive. Liriath," he said, dropping the honorifics. "It is not just rewriting the network, it is learning. Every time I find a pattern, the code realizes I have found it and folds back on itself to hide the message. It is playing hide and seek." Liriath left the balcony and took the gravity lift down. She stepped onto the platform beside him. Up close, Elias looked exhausted, his skin pale under the harsh lighting of the data stream, but his eyes were fever bright. She walked into the projection. The symbols flowed over her skin, illuminating the bioluminescent markings on her neck in stark contrast. "We suspected it was adaptive," Liriath said softly. "But we did not know it was sentient." "It is not sentient. Not yet," Elias corrected. "It is mimicking sentience. It is a reflex, like a plant turning toward the sun. But the question is, what is the sun? What is it trying to reach?" He manipulated the display, sweeping his arms wide to expand a section of the code. "Look here." He pointed to a jagged red line that cut through the harmonious blue streams. "This signature, I have seen this architecture before. It is old. Pre-unification war old." Liriath stiffened. She looked at the red line, and her luminous eyes dimmed slightly. "You are sure?" she asked. "The syntax is archaic," Elias said. "It uses base 12 logic. Nobody uses base 12 anymore except the royal architects of the First Dynasty." Liriath finished for him. "My ancestors." She turned away from the display, walking to the edge of the platform where the darkness of the cathedral dropped away into nothingness. "There is something I did not tell you on the station." "Elias," she said. Elias waited. He had learned that when royalty decided to share secrets, it was usually because they had run out of other options. This code, Liriath said, her back to him. It has been appearing in the border sectors for months. At first, it was just static, noise in the background of shipping channels. But then we noticed a pattern. Wherever the code spiked, rebel transmissions appeared 3 days later. Elias crossed his arms. So the rebels are using it? No, Liriath said, turning to face him. The rebels are barely organized enough to fly their own ships. They are scavengers. They could not build something like this. Someone is feeding it to them. Someone is using the ghost code to destabilize the fringe worlds, and they are making it look like the orders are coming from my house. Elias let out a low whistle, a false flag. Classic, messy, but effective. If the human colonies think the high dynasties are funding the rebels. War, Liriath said. Total war. And in the chaos, someone seizes the throne. The gravity of the situation settled over the platform like a physical weight. Elias looked at the woman standing before him. She looked very small against the backdrop of the towering data towers. She was the face of an empire that spanned stars, yet she seemed incredibly alone. Before Elias could respond, the air in the cathedral shimmered. The ship's AI voice, a melodic and genderless tone, filled the room. Highness, priority alert, incoming transmission from the Joint Border Command. Put it through, Liriath said, her posture instantly stiffening into regal perfection. The data streams vanished, replaced by a massive holographic screen. The face of a human admiral appeared. He was red-faced, sweating, and furious. Beside him was an Ethelgard envoy who looked pale and shaken. Princess Liriath, the admiral barked. We have just received confirmation. Convoy Delta 9 has been destroyed in Sector 12. No survivors. Liriath's expression did not flicker. Admiral, I am grieved to hear this. But why are you contacting my personal vessel? Don't play games with me, the admiral shouted. The black box data from the lead transport was recovered. The torpedoes that tore that convoy apart had your house's digital signature on them. The targeting telemetry was authorized by the solar hymn. That is impossible, Liriath said, her voice ice-cold. My ship has been in dry dock or transit for the last week. We have fired no weapons. The evidence is irrefutable. The admiral spat. The human colonies are declaring a state of emergency. If you cross into our space, you will be fired upon. This is your only warning. The connection cut. The hologram dissolved. The silence that followed was deafening. Elias looked at Liriath. She had not moved. Her hands were clenched at her sides, the knuckles white. They set us up, Elias said quietly. Liriath took a shaky breath. They did not just set us up. Elias, they used my ship's own ghost signature. That is what the code is doing. It is not just hiding messages, it is spoofing identities. It made the network believe I pulled the trigger. She looked at him, and for the first time, Elias saw panic behind the violet glow of her eyes. We have to go to the neutral zone, she said. There is a summit meeting in 3 hours. I have to face them. I have to deny this in person. It is a trap, Elias said. I know, Liriath replied. But if I do not go, I admit guilt. The next few hours were a blur of activity. The solar hymn jumped through hyperspace, tearing a hole in the fabric of the universe to reach the coordinates of the diplomatic station. The meeting took place in a grand circular chamber that straddled the border between human and Ethelgard space. One half of the room was decorated in the stark, utilitarian steel of the Earth Federation. The other half was draped in the silk and silver of the Empire. Elias stood at the back of the room, dressed in a formal tunic that Liriath's droids had synthesized for him. It scratched his neck, but it made him look less like a smuggler and more like an advisor. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Human generals sat with their hands near their sidearms. Ethelgard diplomats stood like statues, their faces unreadable masks of porcelain and light. Liriath stood in the center, facing the accusations. Ambassador Kyle, a human with eyes like flint, threw a datapad onto the table. "We have the logs, Princess. We have the energy signatures. How do you explain the deaths of 400 civilians?" "I explain it as a fabrication," Liriath said, her voice calm, projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. "My ship has been compromised by an external viral agent. We are currently investigating." "Investigating?" Kale scoffed. "While you investigate, our people burn? This is an act of aggression from a dying empire trying to flex its muscles one last time." The Ethelgard High Minister, a being named Theron whose skin was a deep, iridescent blue, stepped forward. "Careful, Ambassador," Theron warned softly. "You speak of the Silver House. To insult the princess is to insult the history of the galaxy. History does not pay for blood," Kale shot back. Elias watched the exchange, his eyes darting from face to face. He was not listening to the words, he was listening to the cadence. He saw the way Theron's eyes lingered on Liriath with a cold, predatory assessment. He saw the way the human generals looked at the Ethelgard not as enemies, but as opportunities for promotion. Every polite phrase was a dagger. Every reference to mutual cooperation was a threat. It was a play, and everyone knew their lines except Liriath. She was speaking the truth, and in a room full of liars, the truth sounded like the most absurd lie of all. "We demand access to your ship's core," Kale demanded. "We want to see the firing logs ourselves." "That is impossible," Liriath said. "The Solar Hymn is a sovereign vessel. I cannot allow foreign military personnel into the neural center." "Then you have something to hide," Kale declared. The meeting dissolved into shouting. Liriath turned and walked out, her head high, her guards forming a protective wedge around her. Elias followed, catching the glare of Ambassador Kale as he passed. Back on the Solar Hymn, the atmosphere was heavy. The crew moved in hushed silence. Elias found Liriath an hour later on the upper observation deck. The room was a transparent blister on the hull of the ship, offering a panoramic view of the stars. The station they had just left was a distant speck of light against the void. The lights in the deck were off. The only illumination came from the galaxy outside and the faint, rhythmic pulsing of Liriath's bioluminescence. She was standing by the glass, her forehead resting against the cool material. Elias hesitated at the door. He cleared his throat. "You held your own in there," he said, walking in slowly. "Kyle is a shark. I have seen him eat junior lieutenants for breakfast. You didn't even flinch." Liriath did not turn around. "I wanted to scream," she whispered. "I wanted to shatter the table and tell them they are all fools. They are arguing over trade routes and treaties while a digital cancer eats the foundation of their world." Elias came to stand beside her. He looked out at the stars. "Politicians are the same everywhere." "Princess," he said lightly. "Earth, Ethelgard, the Outer Rim, they all just wear shinier clothes and lie with better grammar. But the smell? The smell is always the same." Liriath let out a short, breathy laugh. It was a sad sound. She turned her head to look at him. In the darkness, her eyes were mesmerizing, two pools of violet fire. "Do you know what they call me at court?" she asked. "The glass ornament. Pretty to look at. Fragile. Useful for ceremonies. But do not let her touch anything important." "They are wrong," Elias said. "Are they?" she asked. "I walked into that room and I felt helpless. I am a princess of the Silver House, and I am being played like a beginner at a card game. I can feel the strings, Elias, but I cannot see the puppeteer. She turned her body fully toward him. The markings on her neck were dimming, pulsing with a soft, slow rhythm that signaled exhaustion. It was a display of vulnerability that Elias knew was rare for her species. She was lowering her shields. Elias felt a tightness in his chest. He had spent his life dealing with machines, with logic, with things that could be solved. He did not know how to solve the look of profound loneliness on the face of an alien royal. "You are not a pawn, Liriath," Elias said, his voice dropping to a lower register. "You are the only one who sees the board. That is why they are attacking you. They are afraid of you." Liriath took a step closer. She was close enough now that the ambient light from her skin cast shadows across Elias's face. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You could have taken the advance payment and run. You could have disappeared on that station. Why stay?" Elias looked at her. He thought about the smart answer, the cynical answer. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe I am tired of running. Or maybe what?" she prompted. "Maybe I found a puzzle I can't put down," he said. Liriath studied his face, and her gaze was intense, searching. "Tell me, Elias," she said quietly, "among humans, is it common to feel drawn? Across species," she clarified. "Or am I just a curiosity to you? A client with fancy skin and a checkbook?" The question hung in the air between them, charged and dangerous. Elias felt his heart rate spike. He looked at the curve of her jaw, the alien geometry of her markings, the undeniably human depth of emotion in her eyes. He swallowed hard. "You are terrifying, princess," Elias said, his voice rough. "You are terrifying, and you are impossible to look away from." Liriath's breath hitched. She reached out a hand. Elias thought she was going to touch his face, but instead, she held out a small data rod. I pulled the raw sensor logs from the convoy attack," she said, her voice slightly unsteady, "before they locked us out. I thought you should see them." Elias reached for the rod. As he took it, his fingers brushed against her palm. The contact was electric. Elias felt a jolt of heat that traveled up his arm. Liriath gasped. Her pupils, already large, dilated until her eyes were almost entirely black. The bioluminescent markings on her neck and arms flared, pulsing rapidly, a physiological reaction he had read about in xenobiology manuals but never seen. It was the Ethelgard response to sudden, intense desire. For a second, neither of them moved. They stood frozen in the starlight, hands touching, the air between them vibrating with unspoken gravity. The universe narrowed down to the point of contact between his skin and hers. Then, they both pulled back as if burned. Liriath took a half step backward, her hands clasping together in front of her. She looked flustered, her poise momentarily shattered. "Humans," she said quickly, her voice high and breathless. "You have such high thermal conductivity. It is startling." Elias cleared his throat, shoving his hands into his pockets to hide the fact that they were shaking. "Right," he said. "Warm hands, cold ship, static electricity." "Yes," Liriath said. "Static." She took a deep breath, composing herself. The flare of her markings slowed, returning to a steady, rhythmic glow. "The data," she said, nodding at the rod in his pocket. "Right," Elias said again. "The data." He turned and walked quickly toward the door, needing to put distance between himself and the pull he felt toward her. He felt like he had just walked along the edge of a cliff in a high wind. "Meet me in the cathedral in 10 minutes, Elias said over his shoulder. I think I know what to look for now. Back in the Data Cathedral, the mood had shifted. The playfulness was gone. Elias worked with a feverish intensity, driven by the adrenaline of the encounter on the deck. Liriath stood beside him, focused and sharp, though she carefully maintained a distance of 2 feet between them. Elias plugged the data rod into the console. The ghost code flared, reacting to the new input. It was the key. The sensor logs from the destroyed convoy contained a fragment of the fake signature. It was the Rosetta Stone Elias had needed. "Got you," Elias whispered. He typed a rapid sequence of commands. The chaotic storm of symbols froze. Then, slowly, the layers began to peel back. The recursive loops unraveled. The fractal knots untied themselves. In the center of the hologram, a single string of clear, unencrypted text appeared. Liriath leaned in, her eyes scanning the alien script. "Coordinates," she said. "These are navigational coordinates." Elias nodded. "And a message. Look at the metadata tags." He highlighted a string of text. Protocol 7 Alpha. Initiate culling. Remove redundant species noise. Restore silence. Liriath's face went pale. "Redundant species noise," she repeated. "They mean humans. They mean to wipe out the colonies to restore the silence of the old empire." Elias pointed to the coordinates. "Where does this point to?" he asked. Liriath checked the star chart. "It is an old sector," she said, "deep in the dead zone. There is nothing there but abandoned relay stations from the First Dynasty. They were marked as routes in the old archives. That is where the signal is coming from," Elias said. "That is the brain. If we want to stop the war, we have to kill it there." Liriath straightened up. The vulnerability from the observation deck was gone, replaced by the steel of a ruler who had just found her target. "Helm," she commanded the empty air. The ship's AI responded instantly. "Yes, Highness." "Lock in these coordinates," Liriath said. "Prepare for immediate jump. Override all safety protocols. We are going to the route." As the ship began to hum with the massive energy buildup of the jump drives, Liriath turned to Elias. There was no humor in her eyes now, but there was something else, a shared understanding. They were 2 outcasts, a disgraced codebreaker and a princess accused of treason, standing on the precipice of a war they were the only ones equipped to stop. Elias looked at her, and for a moment, the memory of her touch on his hand ghosted over his skin. "Ready to see a ghost?" Elias asked. Liriath held his gaze. "I am ready for whatever comes," she said. "As long as the math holds up." Elias smiled, a crooked, genuine smile. "The math always holds up, Princess. It's the people who are variables." The solar hymn shuddered as the drives engaged. The stars outside the cathedral walls stretched into infinite lines of light, and they vanished into the void, racing toward the dead moon and the secrets buried in the dark. The solar hymn dropped out of hyperspace with a shudder that vibrated through the deck plates, a physical groan of metal stressing against the fabric of physics. They had arrived in the shadow of a dead world. The target coordinates led them to a nameless moon orbiting a gas giant in the frozen outer dark of the sector. The moon was a sphere of scarred gray ice, cracked by tidal forces and utterly silent to sensors. Orbiting this desolate rock was the relay station. It was a monstrosity of architectural contradiction. The core of the station was unmistakably ancient Ethelgard design. A spiraling organic spire of black obsidian and silver glass that looked less like it had been built and more like it had been sung into existence. But grafted onto this elegant spine were centuries of crude additions. Blocky imperial sensor arrays, heat vents that bled radiation into the void, and docking rings made of rusted durasteel. It looked like a gemstone that had been swallowed by a factory. Elias Thorne stood in the airlock, trying to adjust the seals on an Ethelgard exosuit that was not designed for human physiology. The suit was sleek, white, and armored, but the joints were articulated for limbs that were slightly longer and more slender than his own. "It rides up," Elias complained, his voice tinny over the comms loop. "I feel like a sausage being squeezed into a casing 2 sizes too small. If we get into a firefight, I am going to be incapacitated by chafing before the first shot is fired." Princess Lyriath stood beside him. She looked magnificent in her own combat armor, a form-fitting carapace of iridescent silver that seemed to flow over her body like liquid mercury. She checked the charge on a slender energy rifle, her movements precise and deadly. "It is a standard compression suit." "Elias," Lyriath said, though her voice carried a hint of amusement, "it is designed to keep your blood inside your body in the event of a vacuum breach." "Comfort is a secondary concern, I am just saying," Elias grumbled, tapping his helmet. "If I die, tell the historians it was the suit that killed me, not the enemy." The airlock cycled. The heavy blast doors hissed open, revealing the umbilical corridor that connected the solar hymn to the derelict station. The corridor was dark, lit only by the flickering emergency strobes of the relay. "We are moving out," Lyriath commanded. "Varric, take point. Elias, stay close to me. Do not touch anything unless I tell you to." The boarding party consisted of Lyriath, Elias, and 4 of her elite Praetorian Guard. They moved into the station with the disciplined silence of professionals. Elias brought up the rear of the formation, his magnetic boots clanking heavily against the deck. The air inside the station was stale, recycled millions of times over centuries. It tasted of ozone and dry rot. As they moved deeper into the structure, the architecture began to change. The human-compatible corridors gave way to the sweeping vaulted ceilings of the ancient empire. Elias checked his wrist comp. The readings were erratic. "The radiation levels are spiking," he said. "But it is not ionizing radiation. It is..." "Chronal?" Lyriath stopped. She held up a hand. "Listen," she whispered. At first, Elias heard nothing but the hum of his own suit's life support. But then, faintly, he heard it. Voices. They were whispering, overlapping, speaking in a dialect of High Ethelgard that sounded archaic and sharp. "Ghosts?" Elias asked, gripping the handle of the plasma cutter he had been given. "Echoes," Lyriath corrected, her voice tight. "This station utilizes a localized temporal sync to speed up data transmission. It bends time to send messages faster than light. But the containment shielding is failing." As if to prove her point, the air in front of them shimmered. For a second, Elias saw a figure walk through the wall. It was not a ghost. It was Varric. The same Varric who was standing 10 feet in front of him. The echo of Varric walked silently, checked a corner, and then dissolved into mist. "It is a time lag," Elias realized, feeling a wave of nausea. "We are seeing things that happened 10 seconds ago, or 10 centuries ago," Lyriath said. "Keep moving. Do not look at the echoes. They are distracting." They pushed forward, moving through a nightmare of causality. The deeper they went, the worse it got. Elias saw his own hand raised to scratch his helmet visor 3 seconds before he actually felt the itch to do so. He heard Lyriath give an order to halt, only to hear her say the words a moment later. It was disorienting, a funhouse mirror of reality that made his head swim. "We are nearing the central core," Varric reported, his voice cutting through the confusion. "The door is sealed." They stood before a massive circular portal made of the same black stone as the station's spine. It was covered in dormant glyphs. Elias stepped forward. "Let me see." He plugged his interface tool into the access port. The code here was thick, heavy, and aggressive. It bit back at his tools, trying to surge into his datapad and fry the circuits. "It is the ghost code," Elias grunted, fighting the digital assault. "It is guarding this door. It really does not want us to go inside." "Can you bypass it?" Lariath asked, watching the shadows behind them. "I am not bypassing it," Elias said, his fingers flying across his keypad. "I am annoying it until it makes a mistake." There, with a grinding sound that vibrated through the floor, the massive stone door split down the middle. It retracted into the walls, revealing the chamber beyond. The central core was a cavernous space, vast and spherical. The walls were lined with banks of crystal memory cores, thousands of them, glowing with a dim, dying light. In the center of the room, suspended over a pit of absolute darkness, was a control platform. But it was the light that caught Elias's attention, running through the air, flowing like a river of liquid diamonds over the black stone, was the ghost code. It was visible to the naked eye here, a torrent of raw data that crackled and hissed. It swirled around the central console, a storm of information that felt malevolent. "This is the route," Lariath whispered. She walked onto the platform, her boots silent on the smooth stone. Elias followed, mesmerized by the sheer scale of the power in the room. Lariath approached the main interface. It was a smooth, raised pedestal. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the surface. "If I touch this, the system will recognize my bloodline," she said. "It should grant us access to the historical logs." "Do it," Elias said softly. Lariath placed her palm on the stone. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. The river of code flared blinding white. The station groaned. Lariath arched her back, a scream tearing from her throat that was amplified by the suit's comms. "Lariath!" Elias shouted. He lunged forward and she was convulsing, her hand stuck to the console as if magnetized. The bioluminescent markings on her neck were flashing erratically, cycling through colors that indicated extreme distress: red, black, blinding white. Elias grabbed her shoulders. He could feel the vibration of the energy pouring into her. "Disconnect!" he yelled. "Let her go!" He didn't know if he was yelling at the machine or the ghosts, but he braced his feet and pulled. With a crack of static discharge, Lariath's hand came free. She collapsed backward. Elias caught her, the momentum sending them both crashing to the floor of the platform. He held her there, half cradled in his lap. Her breathing was ragged, gasping. "Lariath?" Elias asked, his voice shaking. "Talk to me." She clawed at her helmet. "Get it off," she gasped. "I can't breathe. The air. I need air." Elias glanced at his sensors. The atmosphere in the chamber was thin but breathable. "It is safe," he said. He reached up and unlatched the seal of her helmet. With a hiss of escaping pressure, he pulled it free. Then he removed his own. The air in the chamber was freezing, biting at his exposed skin, but Lariath took a deep, desperate gulp of it. Her skin was clammy, sweating despite the cold. Her eyes were wide, staring at something Elias couldn't see. "I saw them," she whispered. "Saw who?" Elias asked, brushing a strand of damp hair away from her forehead. "My ancestors," she said, her voice trembling with horror. "I saw the first architect. I saw them standing right here. They were signing the protocols. They were laughing. Elias, they were signing blood oaths to ensure the silence." She tried to sit up, but she was too weak. She leaned against his chest, her armor pressing against his. "Look at the logs," she commanded, pointing a shaking finger at the console. "Look at what they did." Elias reached out and tapped the console, careful not to touch the biometric scanner. The holographic display flared to life above them. Text scrolled by in the ancient dialect, but the translation software on Elias's wrist comp decoded it in real time. Project Silence, Cycle 400. Objective, Dominance Maintenance. Elias read aloud, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. To ensure the stability of the High Dynasties, all subsidiary species must be capped at technological Tier 4. Any species achieving independent network capability is to be designated as redundant noise. He scrolled further. Protocol culling. If a subject species resists integration, the network is to be weaponized, disrupt communication, sabotage critical infrastructure, create internal conflict, divide and silence. Elias felt a cold pit form in his stomach. It was not just a suppression tool. It was a genocide program, a sophisticated automated system designed to keep the galaxy under the boot of the Ethel Guard forever. And here, Elias said, pointing to a new timestamp. This entry is recent. 6 months ago. Protocol reactivated. User, unknown. Authorization, Royal Override Gamma. Someone turned it back on, Elias said grimly. And they tweaked the targeting parameters. He read the new code lines. Target 1, Human Colonial Alliance. Target 2, House Silver Lyriath's Dynasty. Method, Reciprocal False Flag. Trigger event, the Peace Summit. Lyriath let out a sob. It was a small, broken sound that hurt Elias to hear. It is us, she said. My family built this. My bloodline created a machine to murder your people and keep the galaxy in chains. And now someone is using my own legacy to destroy me. She pulled away from him, scrambling to her knees. She looked at the river of code with pure self-hatred. I am a monster, she whispered. I am the heir to monsters. Lyriath, stop, Elias said firmly. I should let it burn, she cried, tears tracking through the silver dust on her cheeks. I should let the humans destroy us. We deserve it. I deserve it. Elias moved. He didn't think about it, he just reacted. He grabbed her by the shoulders of her armor and turned her to face him. Look at me, he ordered. She refused, turning her face away, her markings dim and gray. Lyriath, Elias said sharper. He put a hand on her chin and gently forced her to look at him. Her violet eyes were swimming with tears. You are not your ancestors, Elias said, his voice low and intense. You are not the people who built this machine 3,000 years ago. You are the woman who risked her ship to find the truth. You are the one standing here, freezing in the dark, trying to stop it. It is in my blood, Elias, she argued weakly. The code responds to me. I am part of the weapon. Blood is just biology, Elias said. It is just hardware. You are the software, Lyriath. You get to rewrite the code. You get to choose. He leaned closer, his eyes locking onto hers. My people have a saying, he told her. The sins of the father are not the sins of the son, or the daughter. Unless you pick up the shovel and keep digging the grave, you are innocent. So put down the shovel. Lyriath stared at him. The panic in her eyes began to recede, replaced by a raw, aching vulnerability. She searched his face, looking for judgment and finding only fierce, unwavering belief. She let out a long, shuddering breath. The gray faded from her markings, replaced by a soft, pulsing blue, the color of calm, of trust. You speak to me like I am not a princess, she whispered. I am speaking to the person, Elias said. The princess is just a job title. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was no longer cold. The space between them seemed to shrink. Elias became acutely aware of her physical presence. Without the helmet, he could smell her scent, that rain-on-stone smell, mixed now with the sharpness of ozone and the salt of her tears. He could feel the heat radiating from her skin, a warmth that defied the icy air of the crypt. Liriath leaned forward. Her movements were slow, tentative. She rested her forehead against his. Elias froze. He knew enough about Ethelgard culture to know what this meant. It was a gesture reserved for family, for bondmates. It was a sharing of mind and breath. "I am so tired, Elias," she whispered against his skin. "I am so tired of being a symbol. I am tired of being the strong one, the cold one, the one with no right to want anything for herself." Elias brought his hands up, resting them on her waist, on the armored plating that covered her ribs. "What do you want?" "Liriath?" he asked softly. She pulled back just enough to look at his lips, then up to his eyes. Her pupils were dilated again, swallowing the violet irises. "I want this," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I want someone who sees the panic and does not look away. I want your mind. Elias, I want the way you see the world. And—" she hesitated, her breath hitching. "And I want you to stop looking at me like I am a client." Elias felt his own control snap, the professional distance he had tried to maintain. The cynical wall he had built around his heart after his discharge crumbled into dust. "I stopped looking at you like a client the moment you threatened to give me your ship," he murmured. He closed the distance. The kiss was cautious at first, a testing of waters. Her lips were softer than he expected. Cool at first contact, then instantly warm. But the caution lasted only a second. Liriath made a sound low in her throat, a desperate noise of need, and pressed closer to him. Elias's hands tightened on her waist, pulling her flush against him. The bulky armor between them felt like an insult. He wanted to feel her heartbeat, not the ceramental plating. She kissed him with a hunger that spoke of a lifetime of isolation. It was messy and fierce and terrifyingly honest. Elias responded in kind, pouring all his own loneliness, all his years of being the outcast, into the contact. He felt the change in her biology against him. Her bioluminescence flared bright, brilliant ripples of azure and violet washing over her skin, casting shifting shadows on the walls of the ancient chamber. It was dizzying. He was kissing a woman who was literally glowing with emotion. For a moment, the ghost code, the war, the conspiracy, it all vanished. There was only the heat of her mouth, the grip of her hands tangling in his hair, and the overwhelming realization that he was falling in love with a woman who belonged to the stars. Elias's internal monologue was a chaotic scream of warning. "She is royalty. You are a criminal. This destroys everything." But the visceral relief of finally letting himself feel silenced the logic. He held her as if she were the only solid thing in a dissolving universe. Liriath broke the kiss, gasping for air, but she didn't pull away. She kept her forehead pressed to his, her eyes closed, her markings pulsing in a rapid, chaotic rhythm. "Elias," she breathed. Elias opened his eyes. He felt wrecked, in the best possible way. "Yeah," he managed to say. "We have to." "I know." Before they could say anything else, before they could define what had just happened or what it meant for the galaxy, the station lurched. This time, it wasn't a vision. A massive explosion rocked the foundations of the relay. Dust and debris rained down from the vaulted ceiling. The river of ghost code flickered violently and turned an angry blood red. Varric's voice crackled over the open comms, sounding strained. "Highness! Contact! Multiple hostile vessels dropping out of stealth. They are firing on the relay." Elias and Liriath pulled apart, the intimacy shattering instantly into adrenaline. "Helmets!" Elias shouted, grabbing hers and shoving it into her hands. They jammed their helmets back on, the seals hissing shut just as a second impact shook the floor beneath them, hard enough to knock them off their feet. Who is it? Liriath demanded, her voice shifting instantly back to command mode, though breathless. Unmarked frigates, Varric yelled. They tracked the code activation. They are trying to collapse the station with us inside. We have the data, Elias said, scrambling to his feet and helping Liriath up. We have the proof. We need to go, now. They sprinted for the exit. The station was dying around them. The ancient gravity generators, destabilized by the attack, began to fluctuate. One moment, Elias was running on the floor. The next, the gravity shifted 90 degrees and he slammed into the wall, which was now down. Gravity failure, he shouted. Mag boots! He engaged the magnetic locks on his soles. Liriath did the same. They became spiders, running along the wall as debris fell sideways past them. The corridor ahead exploded inward. Metal shrapnel pinged off Elias's shield generator. Through the breach, he saw the void of space and the flash of laser fire. An enemy boarding pod had latched onto the hull like a leech. Hostiles in the corridor, Varric warned. 3 figures in heavy matte black combat armor emerged from the smoke. They raised kinetic rifles. Down! Elias tackled Liriath, skidding across the wall. Bolts of superheated plasma scorched the air where they had been standing. Liriath rolled onto her back, raised her rifle, and fired 2 precise shots. The lead attacker crumpled, his armor fused. Varric and the other guards laid down a wall of suppressing fire. Move, Varric roared. We will hold them. Get the princess to the ship. Varric, no, Liriath shouted. Go, the giant guard bellowed, stepping into the open to draw fire. Elias grabbed Liriath's arm and dragged her toward the airlock. She resisted for a fraction of a second, looking back at her guard, but then the logic of command took over. She turned and ran. They scrambled through the collapsing umbilical. The solar hymn was firing its maneuvering thrusters, straining against the docking clamps. Jump sequence initiated, the ship's AI announced calmly over their comms. Separation in 10 seconds. They dove into the airlock of the solar hymn. The outer doors slammed shut. Break seal, Liriath screamed. The ship tore itself free from the station, ripping the docking ring apart. The solar hymn spun away, its shields flaring brilliant gold as they absorbed a barrage of torpedo fire from the ambushers. Jump! The stars outside the viewport stretched into lines. The universe twisted. And then, silence. They were in hyperspace. Elias slumped against the bulkhead of the airlock, sliding down until he hit the floor. He was gasping for air, sweat stinging his eyes. Liriath stood opposite him, leaning heavily against the closed door. She stripped off her helmet and let it clang to the deck. She looked at Elias. Her hair was a mess, plastered to her forehead. Her face was smudged with soot. She looked terrified and fierce and beautiful. They survived, but the cost was already mounting. Liriath looked at the empty space beside Elias where Varric should have been. Her face crumpled for a second before she walled it off behind the mask of the ruler. She looked back at Elias. The memory of the kiss, of the confession in the dark, hung between them, heavy and unresolved. Everything had changed. They were no longer just partners. They were co-conspirators in treason and lovers on the run. "Are you all right?" Elias asked, his voice rasping. Liriath nodded slowly. She touched her fingers to her lips, as if checking they were still there. "We have the logs," she said softly. "We know the truth." "Yeah," Elias said, closing his eyes and leaning his head back against the metal. "Now we just have to survive long enough to tell someone." Liriath walked over to him. She didn't say a word. She just reached down, took his hand in hers, and squeezed it hard. The bioluminescence on her wrist pulsed once, a steady, strong beat. Then she turned and marched toward the bridge, leaving Elias alone in the airlock with the echo of her touch burning on his skin. The atmosphere aboard the solar hymn had curdled. What had once been a vessel of quiet, confident grace was now a ship in mourning, vibrating with the suppressed tension of a crew looking for someone to blame. The loss of Varric and the damage to the hull had shattered the illusion of invulnerability that usually surrounded a high dynasty flagship. Elias Thorne felt the weight of every stare as he walked the corridors. The Ethelgard crew members, usually polite if distant, now stopped their conversations when he passed. Their luminous eyes tracked him with a mixture of suspicion and open hostility. To them, he was the variable that did not fit the equation. He was the human element, and in their logic, the human element brought chaos. He entered the central strategy room, a circular chamber dominated by a floating holographic map of the sector. Lyriath was already there, standing at the head of the obsidian table. She looked exhausted. The bioluminescent markings on her neck were faint, pulsing with a slow, gray rhythm that betrayed her grief, but her posture was rigid steel. Around the table stood her remaining senior officers. Sub-Commander Rhine, a severe Ethelgard with sharp angular features, was speaking. "We must purge the systems, Highness," Rhine said, his voice smooth but edged with steel. The humans' interface tools were connected to the relay core when the ambush occurred. It is highly probable that he carried a tracking marker back to this ship. That is how they found us. Elias stopped in the doorway. He did not speak. He just leaned against the frame, crossing his arms. Lyriath looked up from the map. Her gaze was cool. The tracking signal was embedded in the ghost code. "Commander," Lyriath said, "it was not carried by Master Thorne. It was a trap laid for anyone who accessed the files." Rhine turned to look at Elias. The disdain on his face was undisguised. "He is a security risk, Highness. He is an unregistered freelance operative with a history of selling state secrets. We are carrying the most dangerous data in the Empire, and we are allowing a mercenary to walk freely on the bridge. It is illogical. It is dangerous. I formally request that he be confined to the brig until this crisis is resolved." The other officers murmured their assent. It was a mutiny of manners, a polite boxing in of their leader. Elias opened his mouth to defend himself, to tell them that he was the only reason their encryption hadn't been turned into Swiss cheese. But Lyriath spoke first. She slammed her hand down on the obsidian table. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Enough," she commanded. The murmurs died instantly. Rhine stiffened. "You speak of logic, Commander," Lyriath said, her voice rising in intensity. "Let us speak of logic. Logic dictates that without Elias Thorne, I would be dead on that relay station. Logic dictates that without his improvisation, the ghost code would have already triggered the sector-wide blackout. Logic dictates that he is the only mind on this ship capable of understanding the weapon we are fighting." She walked around the table, stopping inches from Rhine. She was shorter than him, but at that moment, she seemed to tower over the entire council. "He is not a guest," Lyriath said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And he is not a mercenary. He is my shield. He is the reason we have a fighting chance. If you question his presence, you question my judgment. And if you question my judgment while we are at war, then you are the liability, not him." Rhine paled. His markings flared a quick, nervous yellow. "I meant no disrespect, Highness," he stammered. "Then get back to your stations." Lyriath ordered. "Scan the data we retrieved. Plot a course for the gas giant Typhon. And if I hear one more word against Master Thorne, I will have you reassigned to waste disposal on a mining barge." The officers scrambled to obey, filing out of the room with their heads bowed. Ryan gave Elias one last loathing look before disappearing into the corridor. When the doors slid shut, the silence returned. Elias let out a long breath. "Waste disposal?" he asked. "That is harsh, even for a princess." Liriath slumped slightly, the regal mask cracking just enough to show the tired woman beneath. She rubbed her temples. "They are afraid, Elias. Fear makes people stupid and cruel." "Thank you," Elias said quietly, "for the defense." Liriath looked at him. The gray in her markings shifted to a soft, weary blue. "I did not do it for you," she said, though her eyes said otherwise. "I need my crew focused on the enemy, not on internal witch hunts." They moved to the private ready room adjoining the bridge. The door sealed behind them, and the atmosphere shifted from public defense to private tension. "We need to move fast," Elias said, pacing the small room. He was running on caffeine and adrenaline, his mind racing through the implications of the data they had stolen. "We have the logs. We have the proof that the protocols were reactivated. We should broadcast it. Now. Dump the raw data onto the OmniNet and let the galaxy sort it out." Liriath shook her head. "No. It is too dangerous. Dangerous is where we live now." "Liriath," Elias argued, "every second we sit on this, the ghost code spreads." "If we release raw data," Liriath countered, her voice sharp, "the conspirators will claim it is a forgery. They will say I created it to hide my own guilt. We are talking about a conspiracy that spans 2 civilizations. They own the news networks. They own the bandwidth. A data dump looks like panic. It looks like guilt. So what is the plan?" Elias threw his hands up. "We wait. We file a formal complaint. We need indisputable proof." Liriath insisted. "We need the physical backups, the hardline connections that cannot be spoofed. The code led us to the Typhon system. There is an archive station there, a black site used by the high nobility to store leverage." "Leverage? Blackmail," Liriath clarified. "Illegal neural backups, financial records of shadow wars. If the conspirators are funding this operation, the money trail will be physically etched into the memory cores at Typhon. That is the smoking gun. Not a digital file that can be edited, but the physical drive itself. It is a risk we do not need to take." Elias snapped. He was frustrated, the pressure of the situation making him reckless. "You are hiding behind protocol again. You are so obsessed with doing this the proper way, the royal way, that you are going to get us killed. This isn't a court debate. This is a street fight. I am not hiding behind protocol." Liriath shouted back, her composure finally snapping. "I am trying to prevent a civil war. You want to burn everything down because that is what you do. Elias, you break codes, you break systems, and you expose secrets, and then you walk away." "I do not walk away," Elias said, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't you?" Liriath stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "If this goes wrong, if the Empire fractures, you can just run. You can go back to your frontier station. You can hide in the human colonies. You have a retreat." Elias felt the accusation like a slap. "I have nowhere to go," Liriath continued, her voice trembling with emotion. "This is my people, my blood. If I fail, I do not just lose a job, I watch my civilization burn. So do not dare tell me I am hiding. I am the only thing standing between order and annihilation." Elias stared at her, the anger drained out of him, replaced by a cold realization of how much weight she was carrying. "Is that what you think?" Elias asked softly. "That I am just looking for the exit?" Liriath looked away, her chest heaving. She wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture of self-protection. "I think you are human," she whispered, "and humans survive. It is what you are best at. Elias walked over to her. He did not touch her, but he stood close enough that she had to look at him. I am not going anywhere, he said. Liriath looked up. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I am terrified. Elias, she admitted. Her voice was so quiet he almost missed it. I know, he said. We are all terrified. No, she said, shaking her head. I am not terrified of losing the throne. I do not care about the crown. I am terrified of losing you. The admission hung in the air, shocking both of them. It was the first time she had said it aloud, the first time she had acknowledged that the stakes were personal. Elias felt his heart hammer against his ribs. He wanted to reach out, to pull her into him, but the moment was too fragile. You won't lose me, Elias said firmly. We go to Typhon. We get the hard drives. We nail these bastards to the wall. Together. Liriath took a deep breath. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Together, she repeated. The journey to the Typhon system took 2 days. It was a period of enforced waiting, the calm before the inevitable storm. The solar hymn ran silent, running on minimal power to avoid detection, to keep from going insane. They fell into a routine. They worked on the code during the ship's night cycle, and during the day, they tried to pretend they weren't hurtling toward a suicide mission in the officers' mess, which was empty during the beta shift. Elias sat across from Liriath with a deck of physical playing cards he had dug out of his pack. It is called poker, Elias explained, shuffling the worn cards. The goal is to lie better than your opponent. Liriath picked up her cards, studying them with intense analytical focus. I see, she said. It is a game of statistical probability disguised as social interaction. No, Elias corrected. It is a game of social interaction disguised as math. If you play the math, you lose. You have to play the person. Liriath frowned at her hand. She had a terrible hand. A pair of 2s and nothing else. She looked up at Elias. Her face went completely blank. Her eyes dimmed. Her markings stopped pulsing entirely. She looked like a statue. I am raising the bet, she said in a monotone voice. Elias laughed. That is not a poker face, princess. That is a coma face. You look like you have been rebooted. Liriath broke character, smiling. It is difficult, she protested. My species communicates emotion through bioluminescence. Suppressing it requires immense concentration. Well, try harder, Elias said, tossing a plastic chip into the pot. Because I am all in. Liriath narrowed her eyes. She looked at his chips. She looked at his face. She looked at the cards. You are bluffing, she declared. Try me. She folded. Elias grinned and flipped his cards over. He had nothing. Ace high. Liriath gasped. You lied! It is the game! Elias laughed as he raked in the chips. These moments of levity were small islands in a sea of anxiety. Liriath tried to learn human slang, resulting in disastrously formal sentences. She referred to spilling the beans as discharging the legumes and called cold feet a thermal deficiency of the extremities. It made Elias laugh, a real belly-shaking laugh that he hadn't felt in years. But the heaviness always returned. On the last night before their arrival, Elias was in the secondary data lab. The room was dim, lit only by the blue glow of the server banks. He was running a simulation on the ghost code, trying to predict its next mutation. Liriath walked in. She was wearing a simple tunic, stripped of her armor and royal regalia. She looked younger, softer. She sat down beside him on the bench. She didn't say anything at first, just watched the lines of code scrolling on his screen. Then, she reached out and took his hand. Elias stilled. She turned his hand over, palm up. Her fingers were cool and smooth. She traced the jagged white line that ran from his wrist to his thumb. "Where did this come from?" she asked softly. "Shrapnel," Elias said, his voice husky. "A fuel tank exploded on Station 9. Wrong place, wrong time. And this one," she traced a small star-shaped scar on his knuckle. "Bar fight," Elias admitted. "Someone said something about my mother. I broke his nose. He broke my hand." Liriath smiled faintly. She continued to trace the map of his history written on his skin. Her fingertip was glowing, leaving a faint trail of light on his palm that faded after a few seconds. "And the one inside?" she asked, looking up at him. "The one you do not talk about?" Elias looked at her. He knew what she meant. He pulled his hand away gently, leaning back against the console. "I was 22, he said, staring at the ceiling. I was the golden boy. I thought math was pure. I thought if you solved the puzzle, you won." He took a breath. "Admiral Vance, he was my mentor. He gave me a cipher to crack. Said it was a communication channel for a terrorist cell. I spent 3 days on it. Didn't sleep. I cracked it. I gave him the coordinates. He looked at Liriath. It wasn't a terrorist cell. It was a refugee convoy. They were fleeing a war zone. Vance wanted to stop them from crossing the border because of resource management. He used my coordinates to target their engines, 2,000 people stranded in hard vacuum." Liriath's eyes were wide, filled with horror and sorrow. "I confronted him," Elias said, his voice flat. "He told me I was a tool. He said, 'The hammer does not decide where the nail goes, Elias. You just drive it in.' So I leaked his personal files. I ruined him. But the people were already dead." He looked at his hands. "That is why I don't trust noble causes. Liriath. Because usually the people giving the orders just want a sharper hammer." Liriath moved. She took his hand again, but this time she did not trace the scars. She pressed his open palm against the center of her chest, right over her heart mark. The bioluminescence there was strong, a rhythmic thrumming heat that vibrated against his skin. He could feel the double beat of her alien heart beneath the warm flesh. "I am not Admiral Vance," she whispered fiercely. Elias looked at her. Her eyes were burning with intensity. "I will never use you, Elias. I will never make you a weapon without your consent. You are not a hammer. You are the hand that holds it." The sensation of her heart beating against his palm was overwhelming. It broke through the last of his defenses. Elias leaned in. Liriath met him halfway. Their faces were inches apart. He could feel her breath on his lips. Her other hand came up, resting on the back of his neck, her fingers tangling in the short hair there. The desire was a physical weight in the room. They both wanted to close the gap. They both wanted to fall into the oblivion of each other and forget the war and the codes and the dead refugees. But they didn't. They stayed there, hovering on the precipice, breathing each other's air. It was a choice. To cross that line now, with the mission hanging over them, felt like a surrender. And neither of them was ready to surrender. Instead, Elias leaned his forehead against hers. He closed his eyes, savoring the tension, the electric potential of what was almost happening. "I know," he whispered. "I know you're not him." Liriath's thumb stroked the back of his neck. "When this is over," she breathed. "When this is over," Elias promised. They pulled apart slowly, the separation physical but not emotional. The bond between them had hardened. It was no longer fragile, it was diamond. "We are arriving at Typhon," the ship's AI announced, breaking the spell. Elias stood up. He cleared his throat, adjusting his jacket. "Right," he said. "Time to go to work." Typhon was a monster of a planet, a gas giant of swirling oranges and violent reds, crowned by a storm system the size of 3 Earths. The archive station was buried deep within the upper atmosphere, hidden by the electromagnetic screams of the storm. The solar hymn remained in high orbit, hidden in the planet's ring system. Liriath and Elias took a small shuttle down. They were disguised. Liriath wore the heavy hooded robes of a minor provincial countess, her luminous markings dimmed to a sickly pale color to suggest illness. Elias wore the livery of a medical attendant. The cover story was simple. The Countess was suffering from a rare neurodegenerative condition and needed to access her family's genetic backup stored in the archive. They docked at the station, a spindly structure that shook constantly from the atmospheric winds. The interior was sterile and white. Droids glided silently across the floors. They passed the security checkpoints with Elias's forged credentials. The guards, bored and underpaid, barely glanced at the sick noblewoman and her servant. They reached the server farm on the lower levels. It was a cold room, filled with rows of physical data towers. Elias went to work. He bypassed the physical locks on the terminal marked with the seal of the High Ministry. He slotted a data spike into the port. "We are in," he whispered. Liriath stood guard at the door, her hand resting on a concealed stun baton beneath her robes. "Find the money," she said. Elias scrolled through the files. He found ledgers. He found communication logs. He whistled low. "It is worse than we thought," he said. "It is not just the rebel factions. Look at this." He pointed to a list of names. "Admiral Vance?" Liriath read, "But you said you ruined him." "I did," Elias said, his voice grim. "But apparently, he found new friends. He is acting as a consultant for the conspirators. He is coordinating the human fleet movements to ensure maximum casualties." "And here," Liriath said, pointing to another name, "High Minister Theron, my father's oldest friend." They stared at the screen. The betrayal was absolute. The highest levels of both governments were manufacturing a war to cull the population and consolidate power. "Wait," Elias said. "There is a file here marked Endgame." He opened it. The plan for the peace summit displayed on the screen. It was detailed, it was precise, and it was horrific. "They are not just going to attack the summit," Elias said, reading rapidly. "They are going to use the ghost code to hijack the solar hymn's weapons array remotely. They are going to make it look like you fired the first shot. Liriath, you are going to be the assassin who starts the galactic war." Liriath went still. "They are going to make me kill the peacemakers," she whispered. "We have to warn them," Elias said, yanking the data spike out. "We have the proof. We have the—" A siren began to wail. Red lights flashed in the server room. The blast doors at the end of the hall began to cycle shut. "Silent alarm," Elias cursed. "They knew we were here." "Run!" Liriath shouted. They sprinted back the way they came. Droids that had been peaceful cleaners a moment ago deployed riot suppression tasers. Security guards poured out of the elevators. Elias and Liriath ducked into a service corridor. "This way," Elias yelled, checking the schematics on his wrist comp. "There is a maintenance chute that leads to the hangar." They scrambled down a ladder, boots clanging on metal. Above them, heavy boots thundered. They burst out onto the hangar deck. Their shuttle was 50 meters away. Between them and the ship stood a squad of armored station security. "Halt!" the captain shouted. Liriath didn't hesitate. She threw off her heavy robes, revealing the combat armor beneath. She drew her stun baton and a small plasma pistol she had smuggled in. "Get to the ship! Elias, start the engines!" She opened fire, not to kill, but to suppress. Blue bolts of energy scattered the guards. Elias ran for the shuttle ramp. He punched in the ignition sequence as he ran. Lyriath covered him, moving with the lethal grace of a trained warrior. She took down 2 guards with precise shots to their armor joints. Elias reached the ramp. He turned back. "Lyriath, come on!" She turned to run toward him. One of the guards, a sniper on the upper gantry, took a shot. A beam of red energy sliced through the air. It caught Lyriath in the side, just below her ribs. She stumbled, crying out. Her armor absorbed some of the impact, but the heat seared through. She fell to one knee. "No!" Elias roared. He abandoned the shuttle. He ran back into the line of fire. Bolts sizzled past his head. He didn't care. He reached Lyriath and grabbed her arm, hauling her up. "I've got you." He grunted. "Move!" Leaning heavily on him, Lyriath stumbled forward. She was gasping, her hand pressed to her side. Blood, bright and silver-tinged, was leaking between her fingers. They threw themselves up the ramp of the shuttle. Elias slapped the closure panel. The ramp hissed shut just as a hail of gunfire hammered against the hull. Elias jumped into the pilot's seat. He slammed the throttle forward. The shuttle tore out of the docking bay, smashing through the atmospheric shield and plunging into the violent storm of the gas giant. Elias fought the controls, dodging lightning strikes and turbulence until they broke orbit. He engaged the autopilot to rendezvous with the solar hymn and spun his chair around. Lyriath was slumped in the co-pilot seat. Her skin was gray. Her bioluminescence was flickering erratically, like a dying light bulb. "Lyriath!" Elias unbuckled and fell to his knees beside her. He peeled her hand away from the wound. It was a nasty burn, cauterized at the edges but deep. "I am intact." Lyriath wheezed, her teeth gritted in pain. "Just a scratch." "It is not a scratch," Elias said, his voice shaking. He grabbed a med kit from the wall. He pressed a coagulant patch over the wound. She hissed in pain, gripping his wrist hard enough to bruise. "We have the drive," she gasped, looking at him with fever-bright eyes. "We have the proof." "Yeah," Elias said, brushing the hair back from her sweaty forehead. "We got it." The solar hymn loomed ahead, a sanctuary in the dark. "We are going to the summit," Lyriath said, her voice growing faint. "We are going to finish this. Rest now," Elias whispered. "I've got you." He held her hand as the shuttle docked, watching the pulse of her life force against his palm, praying that the math would hold for just one more day. The solar hymn was limping. The once proud flagship of the Silver House, a vessel that usually cut through the void with the silence of a held breath, was now rattling. The hyperspace drive was misaligned, sending shudders through the deck plates every few minutes, a constant jarring reminder of the damage they had taken at the archive station. In the command center, the air was thick with the smell of ozone and burnt circuitry. The crew moved with the frantic, jerky energy of people who knew they were running out of time. Elias Thorne stood at the central tactical table. He had not slept in 30 hours. His eyes were red-rimmed, and his jacket was discarded on a chair, his sleeves rolled up to reveal the scars on his forearms. He was pointing at a holographic projection of the Peace Summit's security grid. "We are looking at a localized cascade failure," Elias said, his voice raspy but projecting clearly across the room. "The ghost code is not just attacking the firewall, it is seducing it. It is telling the summit's defense systems that up is down and friend is foe. If we do not patch this logic loop before we dock, the station's automated turrets will see us as the invading armada." Sub-Commander Rhine, who had once looked at Elias with disdain, now nodded sharply. "We are rerouting power to the electronic countermeasures," Rhine said. "But the viral latency is too high. We cannot scrub the signature fast enough." "Then stop trying to scrub it," Elias said. Mask it. Make us look like a garbage scow if you have to, and just get us inside the perimeter. Lyriath sat in the command chair, watching them. She was pale, her skin missing its usual pearlescent luster. The med patch on her side was hidden beneath a fresh tunic, but every time the ship shuddered, she flinched, her hand going instinctively to her ribs. The pain was a dull, throbbing noise in the back of her mind, made distant by heavy analgesics that left her feeling slightly detached, as if she were floating an inch above her own body. She should have been in the infirmary. Her medical droids had insisted on it, but she refused to leave the bridge. "Highness," Rhine said, turning to her. "We are receiving a priority transmission from the High Council and 3 more from the Human Admiralty." "Put them on audio," Lyriath said. Her voice was quieter than usual, but it held a steel thread that cut through the bridge noise. The speakers crackled. "Princess Lyriath," a harsh Ethelgard voice boomed. "This is High Minister Theron. We have reports of erratic behavior from your vessel. You are ordered to power down your engines and await a security escort. This is for your own safety. You are clearly unwell." The message cut out, replaced by a human voice. "Solar Hymn, this is Admiral Vance. We have intelligence suggesting you have been compromised by a rogue human element. Hand over the asset Elias Thorne immediately, or we will be forced to treat your approach as a hostile act." The bridge fell silent. The crew looked at Lyriath. Then they looked at Elias. Elias did not look up from the hologram. He kept working, his fingers flying across the interface, but his jaw tightened. Lyriath stood up. The movement made the world spin for a second, but she locked her knees and forced the dizziness away. She walked down the steps to the tactical table, standing beside Elias. "They are tightening the noose," she said softly. "They know we have the drive," Elias murmured, not stopping his work. "They are scared. Theron and Vance sound like men who are checking the exits." Lyriath looked at the crew. They were waiting for her order. They were terrified, loyal, and waiting to die for her. "Rhine," Lyriath said, "is the secure channel to the Neutrality Guild still active?" "Yes, Highness. But the Guild has no military power. They cannot help us. I do not need their fleets." Lyriath said, "I need their ears. Open a channel, audio only, encrypted on the Omega frequency." She took a breath, steadying herself against the table. Elias stopped typing. He looked at her, a question in his eyes. She gave him a small, sad nod. "This is Princess Lyriath of the Silver House," she began, speaking into the air. "I am transmitting to the brokers of the Neutrality Guild. You are the witnesses of history. Listen closely, because I will only say this once." She paused, her hand brushing against the edge of the table for support. "The network instability threatening the summit is not a human attack, and it is not a glitch. It is a weapon. It is a system called the Root, designed 3 centuries ago by the first dynasty of Ethelgard. My ancestors built it to cripple independent civilizations." A gasp went through the bridge crew. To admit such a thing was heresy. It was treason against her own history. "I have discovered that this weapon has been reactivated by elements within my own government and the Human Admiralty," Lyriath continued, her voice gaining strength. "They intend to use it to manufacture a war for profit and control. I am currently in possession of the physical evidence proving this conspiracy. I am bringing this evidence to the summit. If my ship is destroyed before I arrive, know that it was not an act of war. It was an execution to keep the truth buried." She signaled Rhine to cut the feed. The silence on the bridge was absolute. "You just burned your legacy," Elias said quietly. "I burned the rot," Lyriath corrected. She looked at her crew. I will not ask you to die for a lie. If we survive this, the Empire will never be the same. The Silver House will be disgraced, but we will be free. Elias looked at her with an expression she had never seen on a human face before. It was not just attraction, and it was not just respect. It was awe. Well, Elias said, a slow grin spreading across his tired face. You certainly know how to make an entrance. The solar hymn was still 4 hours from the summit. The waiting was the hardest part. The adrenaline of the escape had faded, leaving only the crushing weight of what was coming. Go, Elias told her. You are swaying on your feet. You need to rest before we dock. If you pass out in front of the delegates, it defeats the purpose of the grand entrance. I cannot sleep, Lyriath argued weakly. Then just sit down somewhere that isn't the command chair, Elias insisted. I will watch the code. I promise I won't break anything important. Lyriath relented. She retreated to her private quarters, a sanctuary of soft curves and silence at the heart of the ship. She sat on the edge of her sleeping platform, staring at the wall. The pain in her side was a constant, sharp rhythm, but the pain in her chest was worse. She felt stripped bare. She had just confessed the sins of her bloodline to the galaxy. She was a traitor to her past in order to save her future. The door chimed softly. Enter, she said. Elias walked in. He had washed his face and combed his hair, though he still looked like he had gone 10 rounds with a gravity generator. He carried 2 pouches of hydration fluid. Room service, he said, tossing one to her. She caught it, a faint smile touching her lips. Thank you. Elias sat down on the floor, leaning his back against the wall opposite her. The room was dark, lit only by the starlight filtering in through the armored transparency of the hull viewport. The light of the distant nebula washed the room in shades of violet and bruised blue. How is the patient? Elias asked. Holding together, Lyriath said. And the code? It is holding together too, Elias said. We built a logic trap. When the summit system tries to engage our weapon systems, the code will loop back on itself and display the source of the command instead. It is a gamble. If they override it manually, then we explode, Lyriath finished. Then we explode. Elias agreed. He took a long drink from the pouch. You know, he said, looking out at the stars. I was thinking about what you said, about the house on the quiet moon. Lyriath looked at him. Her bioluminescence flared softly, a warm amber color. It was a fantasy. Elias? Was it? Elias asked. Because it sounded pretty specific. You said you wanted a garden. You said you wanted to grow things that didn't talk back. Lyriath shifted, wincing slightly as her wound pulled. I have spent my life surrounded by people who listen to every word I say and analyze it for weakness, she whispered. The idea of silence, of just existing without being a symbol, it is the most luxurious thing I can imagine. Elias looked at her. In the dim light, the shadows cast by the ship's structural ribs lay across his face, emphasizing the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the depth of his eyes. I grew up on a station like that, he said. A mining outpost. Boring. Dusty. We used to sit on the cooling towers and watch the freighters come in. I hated it. I wanted to be where the action was. I wanted to be important. And now? Lyriath asked. Now, Elias said, looking directly at her. I think I was an idiot. Important just means you are a target. He stood up and walked over to the viewport, standing in the starlight. Lyriath watched him. She felt a pull toward him that was stronger than gravity, stronger than the duty that had bound her for 20 years. She stood up, ignoring the protest of her injured side, and walked over to him. She stood beside him, looking out at the vast, uncaring universe. "We might die tomorrow," she said. "Yeah." Elias said, "The odds are not great." Liriath turned to face him. The low lights of the ship cast warm shadows across her skin. Her markings were pulsing with a slow, hypnotic rhythm, syncing with the beating of her heart. "I do not want to die as a symbol." "Elias," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I want to be real. For one night." Elias turned to her. He reached out, his hand hovering near her waist, careful of her injury. "You are real. Liriath, you are the most real thing I have ever met." She stepped into his space. The distance between them vanished. She reached up and placed her hand on his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his human heart. It was slower than hers, heavier. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and luminous. "Show me," she whispered. Elias didn't hesitate this time. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't like the first kiss in the cold station. That had been desperate, a reaction to adrenaline and fear. This was deliberate, it was slow, it was a question and an answer all at once. He wrapped his arms around her, gentle but firm, pulling her against him. Liriath let out a soft sound, a sigh that seemed to release years of tension. She clung to him, her fingers digging into the fabric of his jacket. She felt like she was anchoring herself in a storm. Elias kissed the line of her jaw, the sensitive skin where her bioluminescence traced intricate patterns. He felt the heat of her, the alien hum of her biology responding to his touch. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. And it felt like coming home. They moved together toward the sleeping platform, a tangle of limbs and whispers. The boundaries of rank and species dissolved. There was no princess and no codebreaker here. There was just Liriath and Elias, two lonely people finding a moment of absolute truth in the dark. She hissed in pain as they lay down, jarring her wound. Elias froze, hovering over her. "I hurt you." "No," she gasped, pulling him back down. "Do not stop. Please. It reminds me I am alive." He held her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. He looked at her with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "I have you," he whispered against her lips. "I have you." They came together with an urgency sharpened by the possibility of no tomorrow. It was a fierce, reclaiming intimacy. Liriath poured every ounce of her fear and her hope into him. Elias poured years of self-denial and cynicism into every touch, washing it away until only the raw need remained. Later, in the quiet, they lay tangled together under a blanket of thermal weave. The ship hummed around them, a steady vibration that felt like a lullaby. Liriath rested her head on Elias's chest, listening to his heartbeat. Her markings had dimmed to a contented, steady glow. "Do you think people can change?" she asked softly into the dark. "Or are we just loops of code repeating the same errors?" Elias ran his hand down her arm, tracing the line of her spine. "I think we repeat the errors until the pain gets too bad," he said. "And then we break the loop. That is what you did today. Liriath, you broke the loop, but I am scared of what comes next," she admitted. "The chaos. Chaos is just a pattern you haven't understood yet," Elias said. "We will figure it out. We are good at puzzles." Liriath smiled against his skin. "We," she repeated. "I like that word." "Me too," Elias said. He kissed the top of her head. "Get some sleep, princess. We have a galaxy to save in the morning." The arrival at the summit was a spectacle of light and menace. The Peace Summit was held on the orbital ring of Ion, a massive artificial structure circling a neutral planet. It was a masterpiece of engineering, a halo of silver and glass large enough to house fleets. As the solar hymn dropped out of hyperspace, the view screen filled with the sight of it. Hundreds of ships were docked at the ring, heavy cruisers from the human admiralty, sleek destroyers from the Ethelgard dynasties, and the colorful, mismatched vessels of the trade guilds. It looked magnificent. It looked like a trap. Elias stood at the helm, wearing a fresh uniform, his face set in grim determination. Liriath sat in the command chair. She had dressed in her full ceremonial armor, the iridescent plates gleaming under the bridge lights. She looked every inch the warrior queen, though Elias noticed the slight tightness around her eyes when she moved. "Status?" Liriath commanded. "We are being hailed by Sector Control," Ryan reported. "They are ordering us to a quarantine dock on the far side of the ring. Away from the delegates. Ignore them," Liriath said. "Continue on present course. Docking Bay 1, center stage." The ship shuddered as they entered the ring's gravity well. "Warning," the AI announced. "Multiple target locks detected. Coastal defense cannons are tracking us." Elias watched the tactical display. Red lines were converging on their position. "They are going to fire," Elias said. "They are waiting for the ghost code to give them the excuse." "Hold the course," Liriath said calmly. "Elias, are you ready?" "Ready as I will ever be," Elias said. His hands hovered over the code-breaking console. He had rewritten the final sequence of the ghost code. It was a digital mirror. When the signal came to hijack the solar hymn, he would catch it and reflect it onto the station's massive public display screens. It was the riskiest hack of his life. If he was a millisecond too slow, the station's defenses would vaporize them. "We are crossing the perimeter in 10 seconds. Ryan counted down. On the main viewer, the massive docking bay doors of the station loomed. Through the transparent aluminum of the station's concourse, they could see crowds of delegates gathering. They were staring at the rogue ship hurtling toward them. 5 seconds. "Incoming transmission from Admiral Vance," Ryan shouted. "He is screaming to open fire." "Let him scream," Liriath said. 3 seconds. The ghost code on Elias's screen turned from blue to an angry, pulsing red. The attack signal was inbound. "Here it comes," Elias yelled. "Brace for impact." He slammed his hands onto the console, executing the reflection protocol. The solar hymn punched through the magnetic shield of the docking bay. Simultaneously, the ghost code triggered. On the station, the lights flickered. The massive automated cannons swiveled, their barrels tracking the solar hymn. Inside the grand hall of the summit, the delegates gasped as the station's public address system screeched with static. And then, chaos erupted. The code didn't just target the ship, it cascaded through the station's power grid. Blast doors slammed shut and opened randomly. Gravity plates fluctuated, and on the giant holographic screens that lined the summit hall, screens meant to display peace treaties and trade agreements, the truth began to bleed through. Elias's hack took hold. Instead of the solar hymn firing its weapons, the screens flickered and displayed a live feed of the encrypted financial transfers. The names Vance and Theron appeared in 10-foot-tall letters, rotating in the air above the terrified diplomats. Audio logs began to play at maximum volume, booming through the station. It was Vance's voice, clear and cold. "Ensure the princess is eliminated upon arrival. Make it look like a malfunction. We cannot allow the peace treaty to be signed." The delegates froze. The faces of the conspirators in the crowd twisted in confusion and fear. They looked at the screens, then at each other. But the system was fighting back. "Elias!" Liriath shouted as sparks showered down from her console. "The station defenses are not standing down. They are overriding the safety lock." "I see it," Elias gritted his teeth, typing furiously. The code is trying to brute force a firing solution. It wants to kill us before the files finish uploading. Outside the viewport, the cannons locked onto the solar hymn. The barrels began to glow with the buildup of plasma charge. "They are firing," Rhine screamed. Lyriath looked at Elias. Elias looked at Lyriath. In that split second, they didn't see a princess or a codebreaker. They saw the person who had held them in the dark. "Redirect power to forward shields," Lyriath ordered, her voice defiant against the roar of the incoming fire. "Ramming speed!" The solar hymn surged forward, closing the last few hundred meters to the dock, just as the station's guns erupted in a blinding flash of white light. The universe, for a brief and terrifying moment, was made entirely of light. The station's cannons fired, but the impact was not the vaporization Elias had feared. The solar hymn's shields flared a brilliant, blinding gold, absorbing the initial barrage with a sound like a cracking tectonic plate. The ship bucked violently, throwing the bridge crew to the deck, but it kept moving, plowing through the docking bay's magnetic field and crashing onto the landing struts with a shriek of tearing metal. Chaos broke out across the orbital ring. The ghost code, now fully active and confused by Elias's mirror protocol, began to lash out blindly. Defense turrets swiveled erratically, targeting human escort frigates one second and Ethelgard cruisers the next. Alarms blared in a dissonance of human sirens and alien chimes. Inside the summit hall, panic was total. Delegates from 100 worlds were scrambling for the exits as the blast shields slammed down, sealing them inside with the very people they had come to negotiate with. Lyriath stumbled to her feet on the bridge of the solar hymn. Blood was trickling from a cut on her forehead, but her eyes were ablaze with a terrifying focus. "Rhine," she shouted over the screaming alarms, "get the crew to the escape pods, all of them." "Highness, we will not leave you," Rhine yelled back, clutching a console for support. "That is an order," Lyriath commanded. "The ship is the target. Get them off." She turned and ran, not for the escape pods, but for the neural interface chamber at the heart of the ship. Elias was already moving. He had sprinted from the bridge the moment they crashed, heading for the station's manual override node located in the docking ring's control tower. He had to be inside the station's brain to catch the code's next mutation. He burst into the control room, startling a group of terrified technicians. "Get out!" Elias roared, waving them toward the door. "Go!" They didn't argue. As the technicians fled, Elias jacked his portable deck into the main server. He was instantly submerged in the data stream. It was a war zone. The ghost code was a hydra, growing 3 new heads for everyone he cut off. It was rewriting the station's life support, gravity, and weapons systems simultaneously. On the other side of the connection, inside the ship, Lyriath entered the neural chamber. It was a room of pure white light. In the center stood a pedestal with a single, glowing interface port. She placed her hands on the pedestal. Interface active. The ship's AI whispered in her mind. "Warning. System integrity critical. Neural load exceeding safety parameters." "Connect me," Lyriath thought. "Connect me to everything." She gasped as the connection snapped into place. It was not like using a computer. It was like plugging her nervous system into a lightning storm. She felt the station's sensors as if they were her own eyes. She felt the panic of the delegates. She felt the cold malice of the ghost code eating away at the network. She stood on the virtual podium of the summit's public address system. Her physical body on the ship was rigid, her bioluminescent markings blazing with a light so intense it cast shadows on the walls. She became the conduit. "Citizens of the galaxy," Lyriath's voice boomed through every speaker on the station. amplified by the station's own comms array. In the summit hall, the delegates froze. The giant screens, which had been flickering with static, suddenly cleared. They showed Liriath's face, not as a polished princess, but as a warrior, blood on her face, eyes glowing with raw power. "Look at your leaders," she commanded. Through the link, she pushed the data Elias had uncovered. The screens flooded with documents, bank transfers, communication logs, video recordings of Admiral Vance ordering the sabotage of refugee ships, High Minister Theron authorizing the Ghost Code's reactivation. It was undeniable. It was naked truth, projected 40 feet high. On the floor of the summit, High Minister Theron turned pale. He tried to shout, to order the guards to cut the feed, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the crowd. Admiral Vance, standing with his human delegation, reached for his sidearm, only to find himself surrounded by his own junior officers, their weapons drawn and leveled at him. "It is over," Liriath's voice thundered. "The lies end today." In the control tower, Elias was fighting for his life. He was riding the cascading logic of the Ghost Code, using every trick he knew to steer it away from lethal measures. "Turn right, you bastard," Elias gritted out, his fingers a blur. "Don't fire the plasma torpedoes, fire the celebratory fireworks." He rewrote the instruction pointer. Outside, the station's secondary batteries, which had been locking onto a medical frigate, suddenly angled up and discharged a harmless volley of star flares into the void. "Yes," Elias cheered. But the victory was short-lived. The Ghost Code, realizing it was being contained, triggered its final failsafe. Elias saw it on his screen, a jagged line of black code that bypassed all his filters. It wasn't targeting the station anymore. It was targeting the source of the resistance. It was targeting the solar hymn. "Liriath!" Elias screamed into the comms link. "Disconnect! It is a kill switch!" Liriath heard him. She felt the ship's AI scream in her mind, a sound of pure digital terror. The Ghost Code was pouring back into the ship, overloading the antimatter containment field. It was a suicide protocol designed to wipe out the evidence by vaporizing the vessel carrying it. She tried to pull back, to sever the link, but then she saw the network map in her mind's eye. The Ghost Code was anchored to her ship. If she disconnected now, the solar hymn might survive, but the code would fragment. It would hide itself in the station's backup servers. The conspiracy would survive. They would regroup. The war would just be delayed. There was only one way to kill it. She had to hold the connection. She had to let the feedback loop build until it burned out not just her ship, but every node the code touched. "Liriath!" Elias's voice was frantic, cracking with panic. "I see what you are doing. Don't do it. We can find another way. There is no other way." "Elias," Liriath thought back, her mental voice calm amidst the storm. "Please," Elias begged. "I just found you. Don't make me watch you die." Liriath felt a tear slide down her physical cheek. She remembered the touch of his hand on her heart mark. She remembered the quiet promise of a garden on a silent moon. She realized then that true power wasn't about command. It wasn't about fleets or titles. It was about the ability to let go, to refuse to play the game by the rules of fear. "I promised you," she whispered to him across the link. "I told you if you deciphered this, I would give my ship for you." "No!" Elias screamed. "That was a joke." "That was just a line. It was a choice," Liriath said softly. "And now I am making it." She opened her mind fully to the feedback loop. "Ship," she commanded the AI, "initiate Protocol Phoenix, redirect all reactor output into the neural link, target the Ghost Network. Burn it all." The AI, bound to her will, obeyed, acknowledged. "Highness, it has been an honor." The solar hymn began to glow, It wasn't the soft light of shields, it was the blinding, searing light of a star being born. The hull plates began to buckle. The white gold turned to molten slag. Liriath arched her back, the energy coursing through her body. It was agony. It was ecstasy. It was the end of the Silver House and the beginning of something new. Goodbye. Elias, she thought. Then she pushed the fire into the network. The solar hymn detonated. It did not explode outward. It imploded, collapsing into a singularity of pure energy that rippled out through the station's systems. The ghost code shrieked and vanished, burned out of every server, every datapad, every relay in the sector, in the control tower. Elias's screen went black. No, he whispered. He looked out the viewport. The docking bay was empty, where the magnificent cathedral ship had been. There was only a drifting cloud of superheated gas and sparkling dust. Silence fell over the station. The alarms stopped. The screens went dark. Then, a single medical alert pinged on Elias's console. He froze. He stared at the readout. Life sign detected. Faint. Irregular. Sector 4. Debris field. Elias didn't think. He moved. He sprinted out of the tower, vaulting over railings, shoving past confused security guards. He reached the emergency bay and punched the override on a search and rescue drone. He piloted it remotely, his hands shaking so hard he could barely hold the controls. He guided the drone into the cloud of wreckage. "Where are you?" he pleaded. "Come on. Princess, be stubborn, be royal, be alive." There. Floating amidst the twisted ruins of the bridge section was a figure in a scorched silver command suit. Elias engaged the tractor beam. He pulled her in. 10 minutes later, in the station's trauma ward, Elias stood by the bio bed. Liriath was still. Her skin was gray, the pearlescent sheen gone. Her markings were dark, lifeless scars on her neck. The medical droids were hovering, their sensors flashing red. "She has suffered massive neural trauma," the droid stated flatly. "Her synaptic pathways are overloaded. The probability of recovery is—" "Shut up," Elias snarled. "Just fix her." He reached out and took her hand. It was cold. "Liriath," he said, his voice breaking. "You do not get to do this. You do not get to be the tragic hero who leaves me alone to explain all this to the historians." He squeezed her hand. "You promised me a future," he whispered. "You promised me we would figure out the chaos together. I am holding you to that. That is a contract. Liriath, you can't break a contract." He leaned his forehead against her hand, the tears finally coming. "I love you," he confessed, the words tearing out of him. "I was too scared to say it because I thought it would make me weak. But it didn't. It made me brave enough to be here. So you have to wake up. You have to wake up and tell me I am an idiot for crying over a client." Silence stretched in the room. The only sound was the hum of the life support machines. Then, a flicker. A faint, weak pulse of light appeared on Liriath's wrist. It was dim, barely a candle flame against the dark. But it was blue. Elias lifted his head. He watched as the light pulsed again. Stronger. Her eyelids fluttered. She let out a ragged breath. Her eyes opened. They were not glowing. They were dark, deep violet, stripped of their power but filled with recognition. She looked at Elias. She tried to speak, but her voice was a rasp. Elias leaned in close. "What?" he whispered. "You." She breathed. "You are very loud." Elias laughed. It was a wet, choked sound, but it was laughter. "Yeah," he said, wiping his eyes. I am making a scene." She squeezed his hand back. It was weak, but it was there. "The ship?" she asked. "Gone," Elias said gently. "It is all gone. the code, the network, the solar hymn. Lyriath closed her eyes for a moment, a tear slipping out. She mourned the loss of her companion, the voice in her head that had been with her since birth. But when she opened her eyes again, there was a clarity there that hadn't been before. "Good," she whispered. "Now I am just Lyriath. Just Lyriath." Elias agreed. "That is enough. That is plenty." The aftermath was messy, just as Lyriath had predicted. The exposure of the conspiracy triggered a political earthquake. High Minister Theron was arrested by his own guard. Admiral Vance was court-martialed. The Neutrality Guild, armed with the evidence from the archive, forced a complete restructuring of the treaty protocols. There were riots, there were emergency councils, and there were weeks of shouting and accusations, but there was no war. The fuse had been cut. Lyriath recovered slowly. She had lost her connection to the royal network, and with it, much of her political influence. The Silver House was in disgrace, stripped of its fleet and its titles. She was no longer a crown princess with the power to command star systems. She was a diplomat with a damaged reputation and a scarred body. She didn't mind. In fact, she seemed lighter. 6 months later, on the observation deck of the Verity, a modest research vessel jointly crewed by humans and Ethelgard, Elias Thorne stood looking out at the stars. The view was different here. They were in a new sector, watching a construction fleet build a relay station. It was an open design, transparent and unencrypted, broadcasting on frequencies that anyone could access. Footsteps approached behind him. Lyriath joined him at the viewport. She wore a simple jumpsuit, practical and unadorned. Her bioluminescence had returned, though it was softer now, a steady, warm hum rather than a blinding glare. "They are behind schedule," she noted, tapping the glass. "They are building it right," Elias countered. "No back doors, no ghost codes. That takes time." Lyriath leaned against the railing, watching the construction drones weave the metal lattice. "It is ugly," she decided. "No elegance, no poetry in the geometry." "It works," Elias said. "Function over form. It is the human way." Lyriath rolled her eyes. "Philistines." She turned to look at him. The scars on her neck were still visible, silver lines against her pearlescent skin, but she wore them without shame. "So," she said, "the captain says we are docking at the colony on Vega Prime next week. I hear the noodle stalls there are acceptable." "Acceptable?" Elias scoffed. "They are legendary. I am going to introduce you to spicy broth. It will change your life." "I doubt it," Lyriath said haughtily. "My palate is refined. Your palate has never encountered chili oil." Elias grinned. "You are going to glow red for a week." They stood there for a moment in comfortable silence, the easy banter flowing between them like a familiar song. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. They were both tired. They both had nightmares about the fire and the code, but they were standing there, together. "You know," Lyriath said softly, looking out at the void. "I promised you a ship." Elias looked at her. "You did. A cathedral that thinks. I remember. I cannot give you that anymore," she said. "I have nothing left to trade." Elias reached out and took her hand. He interlaced his fingers with hers, feeling the warmth of her skin, the pulse of her life. "You already paid up, princess," he said. Lyriath frowned. "I did?" "You gave up the ship to save the pilot," Elias said. "You traded the symbol for the truth." He looked into her eyes, the violet deep and endless, and instead of a ship, "I got you. I got the woman who was brave enough to strike the match." Lyriath smiled. It was a slow, radiant smile that lit up the observation deck brighter than any star. "That seems like a poor bargain for you," she teased, a disgraced royal with no fortune and a bad attitude. I am a codebreaker, Elias said, leaning in to kiss her. I like things that are complex. Besides, he pulled back just an inch, his eyes dancing with mischief. I still have that cactus to take care of. And it needs a garden. Liriath laughed, a sound that was pure and free. A garden, she agreed, on a quiet moon. She rested her head on his shoulder, and they watched the new relay station come online, a beacon of light in the dark, broadcasting a signal that was open, honest, and finally, truly silent of ghosts.